Manhunt was developed by Rockstar North, published by Rockstar Games, and was released on the PC in 2004. For this review, I played the Steam version, but I also played the PlayStation 2 original when it was released in 2003. Manhunt is a very unique game to say the least. Other than its sequel, I can't really say I've played anything quite like it. If I was to compare it to films, I would say it's like a mixture of The Running Man, The Warriors, and Snuff. The game's protagonist is James Earl Cash, an inmate on death row whose execution has just been faked, so he can be thrown into a little game constructed by an ex-director called Lionel Starkweather. This game means that Cash has to kill a lot of people on camera and make a snuff film. The director has lined up tons of different gangs to try and find Cash and kill him, so Cash has to kill them first. I must warn, this game is very, very violent to say the least, so if you're easily disgusted by violence, then you might want to turn this off right now. Okay, so, Manhunt is primarily a stealth game. Cash uses the shadows to hide himself from the gangs as he makes his way through all the gauntlets the director is putting him through. He isn't defenseless at all though. He has several weapons that he can use to kill enemies. These include shards of glass, plastic bags, pieces of wire, knives, machetes, crowbars, baseball bats, batons, nail guns, pistols, shotguns, Uzis, and even assault rifles. Cash can also use his fists, although that's not really recommended. There are a few instances where this is required in order to proceed, but thankfully they're very short and I think only happened twice. Otherwise, players will want to stick to sneaking up behind unsuspecting foes and executing them. Now these executions come in 3 flavors per weapon: hasty, violent, and gruesome. Hasty executions can be done immediately, and they are the least risky to pull off. Violent ones happen after the reticle surrounding the enemy has turned yellow, and they are much more bloody than the hasty ones. Gruesome ones happen after the reticle has turned red, and they are just as their name implies, gruesome. They usually involve Cash either removing someone's head from their shoulders or stabbing their eyes out. As I said before, this game is really fucking gory. Each execution is shown through what looks like an old VHS tapes footage to really add to the low-budget snuff film feel. Cash can also knock on walls to get enemies to come over and investigate. This really helps break up groups of enemies and get them in a prime position to be executed. As each new gang is introduced, each enemy is slightly smarter than the last. I loved being surprised at some of the new tactics they would pull out that I wouldn't be expecting. This game really kept me on my guard. Beyond the stealthy sections, getting closer to halfway through the game, are the areas where gunplay is heavy. These sections feel much different than the stealthy ones, with having to use cover often pretty much being a must because Cash dies really quickly in this game. The only bad thing is that cover can be a little awkward, just because when Cash is up against a wall and then he backs off of cover, the game makes him face the opposite direction he was aiming, and it just threw me off every time it happened. Other than that, cover seemed to work as intended and was very useful. Since Cash can almost die instantly near the end of the game, gunfights were insanely intense. I was walking around each corner slowly with my gun drawn, just waiting to put a bullet into somebody's skull. I loved and hated the fact that one person could end it all for me if I choked or I wasn't alert. I saw some reviews before saying that the shooting in the game was terrible, but the only things I noticed were that if you didn't aim for headshots, then it took too long to kill enemies. Headshots were an instant kill, so I aimed for those all of the time. Also, some of the early weapons, like the sawed-off shotgun, have terrible spread and range, so sticking to the revolver during those areas was a must. The later weapons, like the Desert Eagle, 12-gauge shotgun, and the assault rifle, all shoot much more accurately, thankfully. The game has checkpoints that can be found throughout the scenes in the form of VHS tapes. Every time I saw one of these, I tried my best to get to it as fast as possible without dying, because sometimes these are quite spread out, and going through some of the sections over and over again can really wear on the nerves. This is not an easy game, and having to watch some cutscenes without being able to skip them is not really fun. On the game's normal difficulty, there's a mini-map that shows how much noise Cash is making, or if enemies are alerted to his presence, or just slightly alerted. I played Manhunt on the hard difficulty, called Hardcore, which doesn't have this mini-map, so I apologize for not having any footage of it. The graphics in this game are pretty decent for the time. They match how older Rockstar titles like GTA 3 and Vice City looked, but since the game's scale is much smaller than those games, the characters and areas are able to have more detail. I highly recommend turning off the fuzzy graphics filter, because it makes the game look much sharper if you do. I had it on during some of the early footage of the game just to show the difference between the two. The game ran super smoothly and I didn't have any issues with the frame rate. It was rock solid the entire time. The game did, however, have a few bugs though, and needed a patch downloaded to keep crashes from happening, and also to fix a gate glitch near the beginning of the game. I will drop a link to the GitHub download for that in the description below. Sound and music in the game were very effective. The music gets more intense if an enemy is closing in on you, and this works really well. I found the sudden change in music to make me feel more tense, so it did its job for sure. The music also has a very grimy 80s low-budget horror movie feel, and I absolutely love that. The sounds you'll hear most in the game are the director, being played by Brian Cox, giving cash orders over his earpiece, the nasty sounds of weapons cutting flesh and enemies dying, or guns blasting. In addition to those things, though, the gangs are also never short of things to mutter to themselves, or even taunts to throw out while they try and find cash. I laughed at a lot of the things they would say because most of the dialogue is just wild. One issue I had with the sound, though, is a few sounds looping over and over until I died in the scene. And they just happen to be the worst sounds to loop on, too. One was a guy taking a shit, and the other was an enemy watching porn on TV. There are some guides online that can help fix this issue, though. So, do I recommend Manhunt? Well, that depends on you. If you aren't opposed to really violent video games that feel like a torture porn movie that you're actually controlling, then you might have a really good time. This game is repetitive at times and can be a bit frustrating, but honestly I had a good deal of fun with it. It's not perfect, but it's unique and it did a great job of not only forcing me to use a good mesh of stealth and brute force, but also kept me incredibly tense and kept my heart rate higher than most any game I've ever played. This game is less than $10 USD on Steam, and it goes on sale quite often, I believe. So, if you're intrigued, then check it out.